All right, so today we're diving deep into Notion.
Notion.
Yeah, we're going to figure out how it became this global productivity like powerhouse, you know. And we're going right to the source, talking to the co-founders, Ivan, Simon, and Akshay.
Right to the source. Love it.
Yeah. And I think what people might not realize is it wasn't exactly like an overnight success story. You know what I mean?
Oh, from what I've heard, yeah, it was anything but. They actually had to like completely reinvent themselves a bunch of times.
Really?
Yeah, like imagine having to rewrite your entire product like 3, maybe even 4 times before it finally clicks.
Wow, talk about a roller coaster. That's got to be tough. So, I mean, what were they even like originally trying to do?
So their big idea, right, was to give everyone the power of programming, but without having to actually write any code. Yeah, they wanted to create this like intuitive way to interact with computers, almost like a universal language.
So like instead of typing out code, you'd be like visually building something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, you know, they eventually realized that it wasn't really solving a core need for most people.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, people want to use great software, not necessarily build it themselves.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and that's when they had their aha moment.
Oh, okay.
They realized that this core DNA of Notion, the elegance, the power kind of hidden beneath a user-friendly interface, that could be applied to something everyone struggles with, productivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny how that works out, right? Like you're working on one thing and it kind of leads you to something even better. So it's like that classic build a better mousetrap story, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, the world of productivity tools, I mean, it's crowded.
Oh, it's super crowded.
So what was it about Notion that really made it stand out? Why did people start like flocking to it?
Well, a big part of it was their obsession with building something that they themselves would want to use every single day.
Okay, so they were their own ideal user.
Exactly. They were living and breathing Notion, constantly iterating on it based on their own needs and obsessing over the smallest details. And I think that authenticity really resonated with people.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about the product, right? I mean, their customer support was legendary.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like, didn't Simon, the engineer, actually like jump in to personally fix bugs that users reported?
Yeah, he'd be coding away and then boom, the support team would have a fix to send out. It was incredible.
See, that's next level commitment right there.
It really was. And it shows how they were thinking about things differently. It was about building a system from day one where user feedback wasn't just an afterthought, but woven into their entire development process.
So with this like user-centric approach, I'm curious, did they have a specific ideal user in mind when they were creating Notion?
That's a good question.
Or was it for everyone?
Yeah. So there was a big concentration of early adopters from the engineering, product, and design worlds.
Okay.
The block-based system, for example, that was actually inspired by design tools.
Interesting.
But their goal, even back then, was to make these complex things simple for everyone.
For everyone. And that's really where it's at, right? Like make it accessible to everyone.
Absolutely. And spoiler, that ambition really took off.
Took off is right. Seriously.
Yeah.
Notion went from like, I don't know, this kind of hidden gem to like a global phenomenon basically overnight.
It's true.
After they launched on Product Hunt.
Yeah, and what's amazing is how much of that was driven by like this super passionate community. You know, those early adopters we were talking about, the engineers, the designers?
Yeah.
They just ran with it, you know? They really embraced that flexibility Notion gave them and started pushing the boundaries of what it could do.
It's almost like they saw possibilities even the founders hadn't, right?
Totally. And that actually brings us to another, I think, really key part of the Notion story, which is their company culture. The founders were intentional about building a really strong internal culture because they knew how important it would be as they grew.
Yeah, because it's one thing to have a great product, but if you don't have the team and the culture to support it, then it can all fall apart.
Exactly.
It can fall apart. So they knew that was super important, and it wasn't just like a casual let's pick some company values kind of thing.
Oh,
didn't Ivan really dive deep into like researching what other companies were doing?
He did. He talks about being really inspired by IKEA's like 10 commitments.
Oh yeah, IKEA.
Yeah, and how they empowered everyone, even like individual employees, to take ownership.
Interesting.
To make things better. And this idea, it's going to sound a little, I don't know, maybe a little out there, but this idea of tending the garden that really resonated with him.
Tending the garden. Okay, I got to be honest, that does sound a little
abstract.
Yeah.
I know, but stick with me. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels empowered to contribute, to innovate.
All right.
Like, imagine a garden that's constantly being nurtured, encouraged to grow in new directions.
Right.
At Notion, this translated into a very flat organizational structure, especially in the engineering team.
Oh.
No rigid silos. Everyone was encouraged to take ownership, share their ideas, contribute wherever they saw a need.
Yeah, shared responsibility.
Yeah.
Not just like top down, do this, do that, right?
Oh, exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. And, they really doubled down on this approach with like building their team.
Oh, for sure.
They were very selective during the hiring process, even if it meant saying no to a lot of talented people.
Yeah, because they were so focused on maintaining what they called like talent density. Remember that example we talked about with like buying a shirt?
Okay, yeah.
If you have even like the slightest bit of doubt, you probably aren't going to wear it.
Right.
And it's the same thing with bringing someone new into the company.
I see, yeah.
If there wasn't a resounding yes from everyone on the team, they just wouldn't move forward. And especially with how quickly Notion was growing, bringing someone in, it wasn't just about filling a seat.
Right.
It was about, is this person aligned with our values? Do they enhance our culture? Are they bringing something unique to the table? They understood that every single hire had a huge impact.
So we've talked about their journey to product market fit, their incredible culture, but we can't talk about Notion without talking about AI.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. Which, honestly, has the potential to be every bit as transformative for them as that initial pivot to productivity was.
For sure.
And it sounds like Simon in particular was kind of like ahead of the curve on this whole AI thing.
He really was.
Way ahead.
Yeah, like even before it was,
The hype.
The hype, exactly.
He was already like digging into this stuff.
Oh yeah, he got to be part of like an early GPT-3 demo back in 2019.
Wow, 2019.
Yeah.
That's like
early days.
Early days, right. Like before GPT-3 was writing poetry and symphonies.
Totally, yeah. It wasn't,
It wasn't all
It wasn't all sunshine and roses back then.
What were their first impressions? Like, what was that like?
I think there was definitely, some skepticism. Simon even talks about how, one of their engineers asked GPT-3 why there were so many chipmunks in Colorado.
Okay.
And apparently the response involved something about, like, a government conspiracy or something.
All right, so maybe not quite ready to take over the world just yet.
Not quite. No, not quite.
But then things started to change, right? Like with DALL-E, Midjourney.
Yeah, those were definitely turning points.
Yeah.
I think that's when the creative potential of all this really started to click for people,
Totally.
Especially Simon. He was like completely captivated.
And then GPT-4 happens.
Right, which just blew everything out of the water.
Yeah, that felt like, it felt like a massive
And it was huge.
leap forward
It was a game changer.
in what these AI models could do.
Absolutely. And even for,
Seasoned, yeah.
like seasoned tech veterans like Ivan and Simon,
Right.
They were blown away. And there's this great story about how they were, I think it was like a company retreat.
Okay.
And everyone's, supposed to be relaxing, enjoying some downtime.
Right.
But Ivan and Simon, they're huddled around their phones, like glued to their phones, just testing out GPT-4.
I can picture it.
Feeding it all these complex instructions, seeing what it could do, and just like marveling at these incredibly coherent, contextually relevant responses it was generating.
It must felt like, like glimpsing the future or something.
Totally.
And speaking of the future, Ivan, as the CEO of Notion, how does he see AI shaping like the future of work, especially knowledge work?
He's very clear on this. He thinks it's going to be essential. He actually uses this great analogy. He describes language models as like new Lego blocks for building software.
I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
It gives us this whole new way to interact with information, automate all the stuff that used to take forever, and just unlock these crazy levels of creativity, which I think is super, super cool.
It is exciting, but it's also, I have to say, like a little daunting.
Oh, yeah.
Because the pace of AI,
it's relentless.
Relentless.
It's moving so fast.
There's a new breakthrough, a new headline every single day. Simon, as someone, on the front lines of all this, how do you even keep up? Like, how do you make sense of it all?
He's a big believer in like deep, focused learning.
Yeah.
Really diving into the research, but he also talks about the value of what he calls focused Twitter deep dives.
Focused Twitter deep dives. Okay, I like that.
Which I think a lot of us can relate to, It's that balance of staying up to date on the latest, seeing what other people are excited about, but not getting, totally
It's in the weeds.
lost in the weeds, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think maybe even more importantly, he stresses this like empirical approach, which I think is really at the heart of what Notion's about too.
Okay.
It's not enough to have an idea. You got to test it, gather the data, see how it actually performs.
Yeah, and it makes me think about, Notion's journey to becoming this global powerhouse. It wasn't about following some predetermined path.
Right.
It was about being adaptable, iterating, taking risks, and most importantly, listening to those users,
100%.
And now, as AI becomes even more integrated into our work, into our lives, it's like the lines between tools and users are kind of blurring, don't you think?
Totally.
Like, what new possibilities emerge when everyone has the power to create?
Yeah.
And how do we navigate that?
It's going to be wild, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. And with that, we'll wrap up our deep dives into Notion. Hopefully this gives you a little bit more to chew on, something to think about, and maybe even inspires you to try some new things. Until next time.